Chapter 5. Davison Akers and his family wanted for very little thanks to Davison's extremely lucrative Fortune 500 Electronics Corporation and Tech Laboratories. Occasionally, he would bring home some extra equipment that had turned up in a company surplus bin somewhere. Often, Jason sifted through the debris and stashed what he needed in the basement. To his delight, his assortment of hardware was about to bear fruit in the form of a very sophisticated home computer system, though very little of it was of the home variety anymore. Bryant Johnson's family had moved in right next door while the guys were still in junior high. Jason helped Bryant pack his belongings in, and they became fast friends. The Akers and the Johnson homes nestled together in the upper-class part of the suburbs. Large front yards with ancient shade trees were separated by the Akers' enormously wide driveway, which led around the side of the house to the garage out back. As Jason turned up onto their street and approached their houses, he slowed the automobile's speed noticeably. His eyes had spied something straight ahead. Bryant glanced at his friend with concern. "What's wrong?" "He did it," Jason mumbled. "Who did?" "He finally went and did it," Jason repeated in awe. "Did what?" Bryant asked, thoroughly confused. Then, as they pulled up to a stop in front of the Akers' house, he saw it, there in the 5-car driveway, resting magnificently in the shade of a huge oak tree, radiated a brand-new Corvette convertible. The bodywork was coated in a dark metallic crimson. The chrome mag wheels sparkled in the afternoon sun, and with the top down, the deep red leather of the interior had a chance to breathe. "Oh my," Bryant said. "Exactly," Jason agreed, shut the Trans Am down and stepped out of the car. Slowly he and Bryant walked over to the all-American sports car. "Man, when Dad said he was going to buy a new Vette after his Stingray was totaled, I didn't know he was this serious," Jason recalled, and he ran his hand along the tail of the car. He loved cars about as much as his father did, possibly more. The presence of the powerful machine in his own driveway made him tingle. Unbeknownst to either youth, the front door to Jason's house had opened when they arrived, and his parents watched them in silence. Davison Akers grinned like a child on Christmas morning. Slowly Jason walked around and carefully opened one of the Corvette's doors, slipping in behind the wheel. The door closed effortlessly, and Bryant leaned over his shoulder to check out the car's interior. It was majestic the way the nose of the automobile sloped down and became one with the asphalt. Cradled behind the steering wheel, Jason was positive he'd found utopia. He whistled and leaned in to examine the instrument panel. The screen door opened, and Jason's dad walked down the porch steps, heading over to the two youths. "How do you like it?" Davison Akers asked. "Man, Dad, it's awesome!" Jason exclaimed. "Totally rippin'," Bryant agreed. Davison looked at Bryant funny and said, "I'll take that as a compliment." Jason was in the process of examining the elaborate stereo system in the Corvette when he said, "I knew you were going through Corvette withdrawal, but this is outrageous." Davison laughed. "Sometimes you just have to break down and do something crazy," he said in an effort to justify his actions. Jason pondered his statement for a second, then a mischievous look came into his eyes. He instantly knew he would fall back on that on a later date. For a brief second he caught Bryant's gaze, and a shadow of concern crossed his friend's face. He suspected that part of Bryant hoped he wouldn't be there. The rest of him wouldn't miss it for anything. Then the mischief was gone, and Jason looked up at his dad innocently. "Say, my favorite father, old pal," Jason began to say. Davison Akers knew his son well. "No way." "Oh, come on," Jason pleaded. Davison spun around and headed for the house. In an instant, Jason hopped out of the Corvette, without opening the door, and sprinted across the lawn to intercept his father. Davison made it to the porch steps before his son barred his way. "Come on, Dad, please," Jason begged. "Forget it. There is no way I'm letting you terrorize the city in my new car," Davison said firmly. Beth Akers hadn't left her position in the doorway until now. She opened the screen door, stepped out onto the porch, and stood behind her son. "Just let me and Bryant take it for a spin," Jason attempted to persuade his father. "All I want to do is go show it to Shawnie." He thought he saw Davison begin to falter in his resolve, but then Davison replied, "That's completely out of the question." "Come on, you used to let me drive your 69 before it got toasted," Jason pointed out. Davison cringed outwardly. "Not one of the more persuasive things you could have said, Jason, you dolt." The teen suddenly envisioned his chances of driving the red dream machine around town flying away on the light California breeze. "That's exactly why I don't want you driving it," Davison said. Jason was shocked. "It's not my fault Uncle Roger's an idiot. How many people do you know who can get a car stuck on a set of railroad tracks, then leave it there to go call a tow truck? I bet he wouldn't have had he known that a train was coming." "Sheesh, my life is a melodrama." At that point, Beth decided to step in. He's right, Davison. Besides, it's just a car. Her support of Jason's request came as a surprise to her son. He knew that his mom really struggled with the outward appearance of wealth. The suggestion was once made to him that she might have a phobia of materialism, but he didn't know if the theory carried any weight. It sure went in line with her desire for both he and his brother Danny to attend public school with the rest of the neighborhood kids. He also knew his mom knew that to both Akers males, a Corvette was more than just a car. Davison's jaw almost fell to the ground. "You're taking his side?" he asked in a squeaky voice. Jason wanted to kiss his mom right then. Instead, he watched his father closely. He knew that if anyone could change his father's mind, regardless of how firm his convictions, it was his mother. The man was whipped. Of this, Jason was sure. Davison Akers looked from his wife to his son in hopeless desperation. "Look, I've got to run back to the office in a few minutes. I'll let you drive it then." The offer was reluctant, but there. With a nod, Beth turned and disappeared into the house. "Cheers," Jason agreed. "Thanks for the ride," Bryant called from the driveway. "Nice car, Mr. Akers." "Catch you later," Jason returned as he and his father headed into the house. "What does an old fart like you need with a hot machine like that anyway?" he teased. "You enjoy living dangerously, don't you?" Davison teased. Jason smiled and shrugged. "I live for the moment," he replied. Davison looked at his son very seriously. He peered at Jason, searching his son in the hopes he'd find the spirit inside which drove him near to anarchy. Then he cracked a grin and put an arm around the boy's shoulders. They both laughed and walked through the dining room to the stairs along the west wall, which Davison had designed near the patio's sliding door. "Someday this old fart is gonna surprise you," Davison said and laughed. Jason nodded and replied, "Don't put money on that." Then he turned and headed up the stairs to his room. Through the door at the top of the stairs was Jason's domicile, his refuge, his fortress of solitude, and he quickly latched his bedroom door solidly behind him. The school books landed with a slosh on his waterbed, and he sighed in contentment. Running his fingers through his hair, he walked over to his stereo, opened the cabinet door, and grabbed his remote from its case. He slipped in a mini-disc of Night Rangers 7 and let it spin. For the last several months, the R&D team at Entech Laboratories had been designing an extremely ambitious, and some said foolhardy, artificial intelligence simulator. Most of it had come together pretty well, but debugging the dozens of gigabytes worth of code and mating components together that were never intended to cooperate in the first place had plagued the project as of late. Many times Jason had silently thanked the heavens that due to a rare sleeping disorder, he only slept every 4 days or so. It allowed him to get a lot of debugging done in those quiet nighttime hours when nothing stirred in the R&D except for him. Having really understanding parents and permission to help the R&D team helped too. Euphoric surround sound flowed through his room. From the top shelf of his walk-in closet, Jason retrieved a large, lockable, fireproof storage box. Inside was a high-capacity portable hard drive. A great deal of the system's operating software was permanently contained on a segmented area of memory on the Entech Lab's mainframes, but he occasionally downloaded segments of the code so that he could work on them at home. He plugged the drive into his sophisticated home computer system and connected to Entech's R&D mainframe. Once logged in, it was only a couple of minutes before he found what he was looking for and had begun the long process of copying the code to the portable drive. As luck would have it, the computer handled the entire process itself. Still struggling with the encroaching fatigue and content to let the computers work on their own, he collapsed onto his bed. Martin Johnson hated bringing his work home with him, but sometimes that's just the way things went. As the owner of one of the top private investigative agencies on the West Coast, he had sacrificed a lot of time with family and friends, plus time for his unfinished personal projects to establish the firm. "Bryant, could you open that curtain for me, please?" he asked, not looking up from the multitude of forms and documents he was sifting through. Bryant groaned as he moved from his comfortable position on the couch to do as his father asked. Martin winced involuntarily against the harsh afternoon sunlight as it reflected from his paperwork, but was glad to not have to squint to read the numerous printed and handwritten documents. Gold-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. He had light blonde hair and a very set jaw. Not overly tall, it appeared likely Bryant would reach his peak height at 5'11". "What you working on?" Bryant asked, returning to the couch only a couple feet away. "This dragonfire thing." Martin sounded distracted by his work. "The what?" Bryant asked. Martin took his glasses off and rubbed his nose where they rested. Then he rubbed his eyes as well. Bryant sat and quietly waited. Martin put his glasses back on and made eye contact with his son. "A client of mine lost their daughter recently to a severe drug overdose.
It was a really messy situation. The cells in her brain experienced an allergic reaction to whatever the drug was cut with, causing the cell walls to disintegrate. The doctors estimate she was in severe agony when she died, and that her brain wouldn't let her go into shock, Martin explained. Cases like this one were the hardest for him, not to mention devastating for the victim's family. Bryant didn't notice he'd put down his computer magazine. "That's awful," he whispered. "I don't know much personally about this dragon fire, so I've had the clerks at each of my offices gather all the information they could on dragon incidents around the country. This," he gestured to the mass of paperwork on the coffee table, "is what they found." Bryant shook his head and subtly went back to his magazine. "Bryant." When the youth looked up, Martin was watching him with an intensity in his eyes. "Yeah? You don't have anything about your life or recreation that you're afraid to talk to me or your mom about, do you?" Martin asked. Bryant was shocked, as evidenced by his expression. "Dad, come on! Don't you think if I was hiding anything, Sensei Yo would have found it already?" Martin pursed his lips, wondering if the facts of this latest case were having a deeper effect on him than he thought. He trusted both of his kids, maybe more than any parent should, but he couldn't comprehend the thought of losing either of them the way this family had lost their daughter. "Geez, I can't believe you'd even think I'd do something so stupid," Bryant exclaimed. Martin held up his hands in submission and said quickly, Okay, I concede." His son sighed angrily and tried to read again. "If you're interested, I have a file of newspaper articles you can read on the subject," Martin offered, then added, "just in case you have a final project in your current events class or something." Bryant nodded in silence. Mark and Sharlene relaxed against the cool grass, waiting outside the fun zone. The echo of people playing and having a good time inside was nearly maddening. The 4 massive mirrored towers of the building looked like a marvelous medieval castle built far in the future. Inside, every kind of entertainment could be found. Hundreds of arcade games, miniature golf, laser tag, bowling, a roller arena, the works. In the palatial indoor plaza was located a snack bar, a small restaurant, all of the numerous arcade games and table games. The other attractions of the amusement center were only accessible through the main hall. The smaller games were grouped together in 4 large areas sunken 4 steps below the main floor. Anyone without a mind for spending cash frivolously would have had a hard time enduring the tremendous amount of currency changing hands. "Hey, Putz, what you sleeping on the job for?" Jason's voice interrupted Mark's peaceful dozing. "So much for getting a little nap," Mark thought, then snapped back. "Waiting for you, you dork," and heaved himself up. Shawnie laughed as Jason tickled her sides. The 2 of them approached the entrance of the amusement center. The 4 friends grouped at the front doors. "Where's everyone else?" Jason asked. Mark shrugged. "Not my day to watch them all." "Let's meet them inside," he suggested. He wasn't so happy about Jason turning their double date into a group outing, but rather than spoil the upbeat mood, he refrained from commenting on it. With unanimous agreement, the 4 teens entered the fun zone.
"I'm worried about Bryant and Karen,"
Shawnie softly continued her conversation with Jason from the car. "He seems to be getting really attached to her, and I don't know if she feels the same way about him." Jason grunted in response as he held the door open for her. "I'm serious," Shawnie protested. "He could be investing a lot in this relationship just to have it go nowhere." "Just like we may be," she wanted to say to him, but couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. She felt herself so conflicted inside over her relationship with him that sometimes she wished her father would get reassigned to another military base just so she didn't have to break up with him outright. There had been times early in the relationship that she couldn't have stood the thought of being without him, but those times were fewer these days, and she often wondered if a permanent breakup was imminent for them. "You know what I think?" Without missing a beat, Shawnie asked. "Do you?" Just as quickly he quipped, "Only when it's completely unavoidable." A pause came to their conversation as Jason surveyed the wildly colorful, carnivalesque interior of the fun zone. Shawnie tried to wait patiently for his flighty attention to come back around to her. Noticing the relative silence next to him, he let his gaze come to rest on her inquiring eyes. "We just need to leave them alone and focus on us." "What?" Shawnie asked. She'd expected a different reaction, and she couldn't understand how he could be so guyish. "Summer is coming up, and the only thing planned so far is Mark's party tomorrow. Aren't you concerned about your best friend's feelings?" Jason firmly replied, "Nope, because he's a big boy and can take care of himself." Shawnie shook her head and asked, "But if he and Karen break up, you'd be there for him, right?" "Just like you'll need him to be there for you when we eventually part ways." Again, a thought she couldn't bring herself to voice aloud. Of course, but I doubt he'd come to me for emotional reinforcement. Come to think of it, I don't know who he'd go to. I assume his mom or dad. By the sound of his voice, Jason sounded genuinely uncertain about the way Bryant would react to a breakup. Karen's been good for Bryant. He's not exactly uptight, but maybe slightly anal retentive at times, especially about women. She's managed to bring him out of his shell. That's a fine thing to say about one of your best friends, Shawnie said, unamused. That's what being a friend is all about. You get the privilege of telling someone exactly when they have a large stick up their butt, he decided. Besides, look at us. We're a couple. We share our problems, the good times, the bad times. And then, of course, there's the fringe benefits, he alluded. You never know how he'll react to them. I think they'll be good for him. The energetic atmosphere of the fun zone couldn't keep Shawnie moody for long, despite how much she wanted Jason to share her opinion. And I think you're evil, Shawnie teased him. Of course, Jason teased in return. Ooh, that smile, she scorned him. In sudden realization, she thought, it could let him get away with almost anything. Trying to look innocent, Jason asked, What? I know you, and I know that smile. Haven't you heard? Jason asked. Smiles are magic. Then he gave her a quick kiss on the cheek and descended deeper into the fun zone. Mark and Sharlene had already immersed themselves in a game of air hockey. As Jason strolled past them in one of the gaming areas, Billy Joel's Only the Good Die Young began thundering over the sound system. Oh no, not Billy Joel! Mark groaned and collapsed onto the table. Hey! Jason exclaimed and stopped short. I like Billy Joel's music. Billy Joel's classics. Billy Joel sings the blues. The Chipmunks sing Billy Joel's favorite Christmas tunes, Mark cried, his quick title improvisation bringing a smirk to Charlene's full red lips. Jason hit Mark playfully on the arm. Mark instantly retaliated and swung at Jason, but the long hair dodged the swing and jogged over to the pool table he wanted to use. Shawnie and Jason weren't even through their first game of pool before the group of 4 teens began growing. Their friends arrived in small groups. Soon they numbered 15, and the potential for even more showing up still existed. Each new arrival took those playing away from their game to say hello, and as much as Jason loved his circle of friends, it began to frustrate him. Just as he'd managed to tear himself away from the group so he could line up his next shot, Shawnie said, Hey lover, your mentor just walked in. His concentration now shot, Jason looked up from sighting along his pool cue. His pained expression revealed his confusion at her statement. Shawnie motioned across his shoulder. At the front doors, several dozen yards behind Jason, a man stood, looking much different than Jason was used to seeing him. He had pulled his hair back into a long ash-blonde ponytail and dressed casually in a light blue polo shirt, name-brand jeans, expensive black motorcycle boots with silver trimming, a baggy brown leather jacket completing the ensemble. I heard he was in town, Jason whispered, and an odd smile began to tickle the corner of his mouth. Fact was, Nick James had caught the attention of many of the people in the room. His immediate focus seemed to be on a group of rough-looking older teens arguing at a table in the nearby restaurant. He quickly crossed across the plaza. The group's loud debate reached a frenzied peak, and one of the guys suddenly jumped up, spun, and staggered right into a table. The restaurant manager immediately pounced on the opportunity to exercise his authority. Listen here, you punks, he yelled and headed directly for them. Before the manager could address the situation further, however, Nick James grabbed hold of the drunken youth, supporting his sagging body with his own strong arms and legs. It's all right, I'll take care of it, he announced, glaring at the manager in reproof. The irate man didn't protest. He immediately stopped his advance and said respectfully, As you like, but any more problems and you'll all be dealing with the police. Then, with a nod, he turned and retreated from the area. Hey, Damien, relax, Nick exclaimed, shoring up the teenager who seemed unable to stand on his own. Nick, what are you doing here? Asked one of the 3 youths remaining at the table. Nick shot the speaker a vicious glare, then freed his right hand to straighten up his bundle's face. Damien, what did you take? Crack? Heroin? Dragonfire? He asked calmly. What was it? The street tough who had greeted Nick stood and walked around the table to the adult, who held up his right-hand man. Damien, can you hear me? Nick asked. Sounding heavily sedated, Damien finally slurred, Just a little J.D. Nick straightened up and looked at the group leader, who stood at least as tall as the investigator. Tanz, what in the world is going on? He demanded. It took a lot of restraint to not berate the street punk that Nick had known for over a year, but for the sake of their business relationship, he exercised that restraint. Tanz shrugged awkwardly and replied, Damien's girl dumped him today. He was already blasted when we met up with him half an hour ago, he explained with an attitude of simplicity. Nick glared again, then returned his direction to Damien. He smacked him slightly in the face a couple of times, just enough to bring the gang member out of his daze a touch. Damien, Tanz is going to take you home. Understand? Damien nodded his approval just before slipping back into his stupor. Tanz snapped at the guys at the table. They immediately hustled up and relieved Nick James of his drunken burden. Nick straightaway turned on Tanz. Take Damien back to the hive, clean him up and put him in bed. Stay with him until he's asleep, all right? Then your time is yours again. He directed much as a parent would direct the friend of one of his own children. Hey, man, Tanz exclaimed, immediately becoming indignant. I'm not Damien's nursemaid. Suddenly Nick grabbed Tanz solidly by the shirt and the back of the neck, then pulled him within inches of his face. Tanz's friends all began to move at once, intent on retaliating, but Tanz held up his hand and his companions froze. No, you're his friend, Nick reminded Tanz. Tanz slowly relaxed, and as he did so, Nick gradually released him. And I need anything you can give me on the street value of Dragonfire. Who's running it, where it comes from, anything you can dig up on it. Shaking his head, Tanz said, That could get me or any of my boys killed, Nick. You know that. Staying stern and direct, Nick refused to cow to the street tough. If I didn't trust that you could get me that information without putting your group in harm's way, I wouldn't give you the assignment. Got it? Pause. Then Tanz nodded. Okay, get out of here, Nick said. The gang members moved slowly across the plaza and out the front door. As Nick calmed down, the noise and energy flowing throughout the room hit him in a powerful wave. Aerosmith's Just Push Play belted over the sound system, the arcade games screaming beeps and whistles, and the people having a great time. From where he stood, he had an excellent view. Jason and Shawnie staring at him from one of the game floors wasn't hard to spot. Nick smiled as he unzipped his jacket. Then he took his time strolling around the plaza, knowing that Jason watched him the whole time. He was capable of doing so while still maintaining his cool attitude. Then he wandered his way down the green carpet steps onto the game floor. Nicholas James, I presume? Jason greeted the private investigator as Nick approached casually from behind him. He very nonchalantly turned and leaned back against the table. Nick crossed his arms and rocked slightly on his heels. Why does it figure that I'd find you here, Jason? Nick greeted the son of one of his good friends. Your hair is longer than when I last saw you. I could say the same for you, Mr. Ponytail, Jason teased. Shawnie couldn't believe all the male posturing flying around the game area at that moment. She sat back to observe the festivities and suddenly found herself struck with how strongly Jason and Nick looked related. Standing side by side, one would swear they were cut from the same mold. Jason was a few inches shorter than Nick's 5'11" frame, and his hair had more brown in it, but the eyes were the same emerald green, alert, piercing, prying eyes. They could have been brothers, or at least cousins. An odd moment of silence passed, then both extended a hand. They shook hands and Jason thumbed over his shoulder. That was quite the show. Nick shook his head. No show, my friend. I have a professional relationship with those young men. I need information. They find it for me. That's how the investigation business works. His voice sounded adult, authoritative. I heard you were coming down. Looking for some light work after the Death's Head case? Jason asked. Nick wandered around to the side of the pool table and marked where the balls were on the table. How did you hear about that? Merely grinning, Jason replied, I have access to an extensive library. Tired of being overlooked, Shawnie prompted her boyfriend from behind. Jason, aren't you forgetting? Jason laughed and slapped his forehead. Sorry, hun. Nick James, this is my girlfriend, Shawnie Blake. Shawnie, Mr. Nick James, he graciously introduced. Wealthy entrepreneur, amateur automobile racer, and owner-operator of the largest PI firm in the world, Sin. He's the one who makes Bryant's dad work for a living. Nick turned to her, and she instantly became tense. This man's eyes seemed to see right inside her, like they knew every secret. They knew her thoughts, her past, her present, and scariest of all, her future. She was overcome with an incredible sense of insecurity. Delighted, Nick said, and kissed the back of her wrist gently. Shawnie stammered out a hello, then quickly retreated over to Jason's side. Nick James flustered her for no reason that she could fathom. All she knew was that she needed a buffer between she and him. Nick's subtle smirk betrayed his amusement at her reaction to him. So, Jason asked, what brings you into this neck of the woods? Haven't seen you since Thanksgiving. Work. Same reason as always. Cool, Jason agreed, looking puzzled by it all, but not willing to push the issue. In what seemed an attempt to confuse him even more, Nick motioned Jason closer. Jason obliged. Close enough so that they wouldn't have to yell over the noise, Nick's intense expression couldn't help but intensify Jason's curiosity. Don't be afraid to let your adversary think you're beaten. He'll lower his guard, then you can hit him with all you've got, came the calm, perfectly logical advice. Jason blinked, clearly not what he'd expected to hear from the investigator. Nick shot Shawnie a cocky grin and then patted Jason on the shoulder. It was fortuitous that I'd run into you here while looking for Tanz and Damien. Take care of yourself and give your folks my best. Maybe I'll stop by the house while I'm in town, he said and left for the door. Jason turned to Shawnie and pulled her into his arms. What was that all about? Shawnie asked, still watching Nick's retreating back and relieved at being just a duo again. Jason shrugged. Nick stopped at the glass front doors, turned, and looked over the whole plaza full of people, his gaze stopping on Jason and Shawnie. With a victorious smile, he abandoned the fun zone.